Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very good day to all of you, my dear students. I hope that you are doing well. A very warm welcome to lecture number 27 of report writing skills. I believe after our recent discussion, I would call it, of course, lecture number 25 and 26, you'll be feeling very much confident whenever you come across any advertisement, any vacancy announced. You'll know what are the skills required, what's the basic procedure. You know how to write a cover letter, alongside you know how to prepare a very good and excellent resume, or you can call it as curriculum vitae, and even moving towards the next stage when you receive the call of an interview. You have all the skills, you know the appearance, you know the behavior, and you know the attitude that you need to present yourself in front of the interviewer, be it an individual or a panel. So this was the target, this was the focus, particularly talking about the content and the components which we have covered in our previous lecture. Basics, style, types, common mistakes which are generally happening, done by the interviewee, and then of course some of the general instructions which are needed to have an excellent interview. And of course then you'll get the contract or the job offer, after which you'll start working, inshallah, in an organization. But in addition to this, of course, with reference to the writing that you will be doing in a working environment, in a workplace, there are some minor things, some minor components of your writing which are generally overlooked or ignored at times, but these minor things have a big impact to reflect your personality, how calculated you are whenever you take or perform an action. And these minor things, my dear students, will be the focus of this lecture, of course lecture number 27, and the upcoming lecture as well. You can call it as, of course, the basic grammar that we will be focusing in these lectures. But these things, even if I talk about myself, because at times I used to think I have learned the basics, but there is much more into the understanding of the basic grammar which will be the focus, and keeping in view the kind of errors that we do in our even student age, the kind of minor mistakes that we are making, because we are not that much aware of it. We just read the things in journal, we write it in journal, but there are minor things about which those rules and those calculated writing can make a big difference and show that you are very much scrupulous, very much careful, meticulous whenever you are writing something. And that is going to, of course, help you in your official writing, your formal writing in a workplace. So if I just take you towards the next slide, one of the most important component generally taken for granted, generally overlooked or ignored, is punctuation mark. But let me tell you, these things are basically, like, you can call them as the signboards which are there on a road, which are basically guiding you to move towards the right direction. Because if someone is talking, if someone is speaking, so their stress pattern, their intonation, their rhythm, their pauses, everything plays a very important role to convey a meaning. And the listener is able to understand the message and the content the way the individual, the speaker, is delivering. But how do you do it? By simply writing something. Well, these punctuation mark, or the concept of punctuation itself, has been developed by writers for this purpose, so that you can convey each and everything with your writing as well. So if I take you towards the basic concept, so it's basically the application of signs that we see, their spacing, and the typographical devices for effective reading, interpretation, and comprehension. So this is basically the concept, and for which these signs and symbols which are basically used are known as the punctuation marks. You know them, you are well aware of these, but there are some minor things that you should also understand with respect to their application, with respect to their use within your writing. There is much more into their application than you know, than even I know. I have tried to understand it, and now I wanted to deliver it to you as well, so that whenever you have to write it, you will write it keeping in view all the points and all the basic concepts which should be there, which should be clear within your mind, and then you will do your writing, and that is going to help you a lot whenever you are writing something on the paper. So what do they do? These punctuation marks basically perform a role in writing similar to what a stress does, what the intonation, the rise and fall of your tone, the rhythm which is there to create this parallelism, the pauses that you take while doing it in thought, and the hand or the body movement that you do in case of a speech. We know the hand and body movement referring to the non-verbal communication. So you are basically kind of reflecting that non-verbal communication within your writing. And the tool of reflecting that non-verbal communication or the paraverbal communication, the vocal communication, is the punctuation marks. Now, starting of course from the very common punctuation mark that we learn, I believe, for the very first time, that we see, I believe, for the very first time whenever we see some statement. So this, I believe, is the first one that we come across, that we are taught at the beginning, and that is of course known as full stop or a period. So this is the dot that you see over here within parenthesis. As you can see, this is the dot that you basically place, but what does it refer to, or what are its versatile uses? To mark the end of a sentence expressing a statement, like your statement number 1, your 2 and 3 are clearly reflecting that whenever you have said something and now you want to express that the statement has ended, so you are placing a full stop at the end, and it means it has ended. Now you will be starting with some other sentence. In addition to this, it's also used to signify an acronym. So these USA for United States of America, or laser for light amplification through stimulated emission of radiation, seems like a big one, but it's like an acronym. Then of course NASA. So these are all the acronyms, and when you're using them, just the way to signify these acronyms, you also use just the way you find these dots or periods or full stop within these letters is also another way of using a period. One common error which is generally committed is its usage instead of a comma. Sometimes comma is placed where there is a need of using a full stop. So there needs to be this clarity between the usage of a comma and a full stop, because comma is basically coming ahead. But the point to understand with respect to the use of a period is that once you believe that the statement is complete in itself, does not require the kind of link which is needed when a comma is placed between two expressions, then you basically place a full stop. That means sentence is complete in its thought and now it has ended. So this means a full stop over here, and now you'll be moving ahead. So that is basically the error committed, because you place a comma where basically there has to be a full stop. So moving ahead, we are going towards the next stage where you place this symbol over that dot, making it like a question mark. So sign of interrogation or the question mark. When do you use it? Of course, even you can tell me about it whenever, of course, you have to raise a question. So once the question has been written at the end to show that a question is being asked, so of course you use this sign of interrogation. So at the end of an interrogative sentence, where do you live? Would you like to have some tea? And how old are you? So these are the general expression, and you see the use of question mark as evident over here within the examples. In addition, now the interesting usage, just the way I told you that the journal interpretation and the journal purpose would also be accompanied alongside some specific uses of these punctuation marks, which were not that much known to us, as they will be once you go through the lecture. So these are also used to mention something that is uncertain. So this one was even surprising for me as well, but this is the way in which you basically use the expression as highlighted here. He was born in 1952 and died in 2011. Well, in this statement, point here is that the one, let's suppose if I am the writer of this statement, if I have written it, so I am sure that the year of death is 2011, but even I myself am not sure whether the year of birth was really 1952 or not. So in that situation, you basically, even if you have to mention that dubious or that doubtful year, although you mention it, but alongside you use this question mark within parenthesis, and this will reflect that even you are not certain about the statement or the point which you have just made, because you are using that question mark within parenthesis. So this information coming within the statement itself is a bit uncertain, which is why the question mark is here. Now, point to remember, question mark should not be used to end an indirect question, which of course has a declarative structure. In a similar way, as the point has just clarified, that you have written something or you have said something, and within which basically you have conveyed some information about which you are doubtful, you are not sure, and that basically uncertain information becomes a question, an indirect question for the other person to answer. Let's suppose he knows the answer. Let's suppose the person who is the reader of the above statement, he was born in 1952 and died in 2011. So of course, without mentioning or using that mark, if you write that statement, but in a way that shows that you are basically trying to convey an indirect question to the other person, well, once again, at the end of such a statement, you're not supposed to use the question mark. Shouldn't be used, which is why you do not find this question mark over here. Even if this was a question, an indirect question, you do not see any question mark over here at the end. Rather, it's coming over here. So this is the point, which is why it's written within parentheses and in the middle of a sentence. Uncertainty reflected within parentheses using the question mark, rather than coming at the end. Otherwise, it would turn it into a direct question, which would, according to the sentence, will make the whole sentence grammatically incorrect. So this is also one of the rules which should be there within your mind, especially writing your content or writing. Now this is the next punctuation mark, known as the exclamation mark. And this one, as you can see over here, is basically used to end an exclamatory sentence. A sentence that basically involves this reflection of emotions. Although we have many mobile apps in which there are emoticons, in which there are emojis, and there are many other ways now to reflect your emotions, but this is the way, this is the conventional way in which this is the mark which is basically used to express your emotions. What kind of emotions? Surprise, it can be shock, it can be dismay. As you can see within the example as well, do not call on this number again, and then of course the sign of exclamation. Silence, simply reflecting the fact that there is a lot of anger involved, and then once again this mark of exclamation along with this go. So it doesn't mean that I'm saying simply in this tone just the way go, but involves a big, heavy, loud way of saying this go, because there is a movie, this word reminds me of it, it's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, in which there is a character, there is an ape who's the leader of all the other apes. Caesar is the name, very intelligent, but some humans simply trespassed from that area where they all were living, and he just simply said it in such a way that This is the word that was repeated by all other. So if you really want to feel the impact, what this sign of exclamation is basically reflecting, so that's the movie and that's the moment to watch. You will realize how this go is actually said, just the way Caesar said it. So you can check it out if you're interested to watch movies. Otherwise, of course, you can just follow it or try to say it on your own. You'll get it right. So this exclamation basically involves the use of emotions, but one point to remember is that exclamation mark should not be used in case of your formal writing, because in formal writing, of course, you want to maintain this formal environment. There is a code of conduct, there are some etiquettes within which, of course, this one is using or reflecting a lot of emotions, so you try to keep it to a minimum, convey it in a neutral way, unless and until it becomes very much essential. There is no other way out. Otherwise, you have to avoid or keep the use of this informal writing to minimum. Moving ahead, we have the next and the one which was referred while talking about full stop, and that's comma. Comma is very much interesting, and I want you to follow all the points with respect to its usage, the way it's applied, the way it's used. It's basically applied for separating and listing the items, and it's basically considered as a substitute of and or. So of course, if there are certain items which you have listed within a sentence, by using the words of and or, I need this and this and this, or I need either this or this. So rather than this, you can using these and or, so you can have this comma as a substitute of these expression. So this is a point which is being conveyed over here. For example, the three primary colors of RYP model, this is basically a model proposed for reflecting those three colors through which you are able to, by mixing them, form many other colors. By mixing red and yellow, you can make orange, and red and blue makes purple, blue and yellow, I guess, green. But the point here is that the statement has this use of comma over here, indicating the fact that instead of using this and again, you are using comma as a substitute for the expression and. Moving ahead, this comma is also used to join two complete sentences alongside conjunctions. So these are the conjunctions: and, or, nor, but, while, so, yet, and so on. As you can see within the example, I can tell you the reason, but I will not. So basically, this is the place where there is a conjunction, and this is the comma which is being used alongside these expressions. Two complete sentences, I will not, and of course this is also another sentence which is conveying the meaning, and between these two there is conjunction and there is a comma. So well, there is a conjunction, you are placing that comma alongside, so this becomes one usage of a comma as well. Then moving ahead, to show that one or more words have been left out, being a repetition of previous words and phrases. Now this one also becomes an interesting usage with respect to a comma, that basically there is a statement or which has some information at the beginning, and the information which is coming ahead within that same statement or that sentence will repeat the content which is already there within the beginning. For example, some students use punctuation marks correctly, others not. Over here, I want you to focus on others. Others basically is saying other students and their usage of punctuation mark. This is basically the reference which is being made by the application, or by mentioning or by writing others over here. And one point which is mentioned right after placing a comma is not, which means that these two words have reflected this meaning, that other students are not able to use these punctuation marks correctly. So rather than using this long sentence, they have simply said others not. So this is also another usage of a comma. Of course, it has to be used tactically so that the sentence remains grammatically correct, but this is also one of the usage when it comes to a comma. So whenever coming across such an expression, you would know that if a comma is being placed in such way, it means that it is basically referring to the information which has already been provided at the initial stages of a sentence. So looking back at the beginning of a sentence will convey you the meaning and would help you understand the sentence itself, if of course it is structured in this way. Moving ahead, there is another category of a comma, same comma of course. It's named bracketing comma because this is basically the function that it performs. If you look into it, to insert additional information without affecting the actual meaning of a sentence, because we are coming towards those parentheses, those brackets. The point here is that this is basically that specific category of a comma that is used in the form of a pair. Of course, you have a statement, and within that statement, if you want to provide something additional, which would of course help out in the understanding. Otherwise, if you simply remove it, if you do not provide that additional information, still that sentence will convey a meaning. It will remain complete. The meaning will not be affected if you remove that additional information. But to add that additional information, the kind of comma that you place is basically known as the bracketing comma. If you are placing that additional information within the middle of a sentence, then you use this bracketing comma in pairs, meaning there won't be a single comma, rather that information which is coming, either 2 words or 3 words, those 3 words would have a comma here and a comma here, and these 2 bracketing comma are going to clip this additional information within that sentence. As you can see as well, if I show you point number 2 for explanation, these commas are used as a pair within a sentence. For example, this job fair, I would suggest, would be very helpful for job seekers. Now if you remove this I would suggest, you simply get this job fair would be very helpful for job seekers. Rather, you have placed that additional information, but you can clearly see this is 1 comma and this is 1 comma. These are the bracketing comma, clipping that additional information over here to convey additional information. And at that point which I mentioned at the beginning of this slide, if that additional information is coming either at the beginning or the end, the point here is that you're going to place a single comma, as although often wet, Britain has lots of sunshine. So it can exist alone, but although often wet, additional information with the bracketing comma, then you have extended the meaning of the same sentence. So this category or the usage of a comma is basically known as the bracketing comma. In case of listing, use serial or Oxford comma before and. So this is also another interesting point that you should understand and get used to it as well. You'll come across many kinds of writing in which there are occasions in which whenever you find such a list as I need a paper, pen and a pencil. So over here, sometimes before and there is not a comma, and sometimes there is a comma. Actually, this comma, when it's there, it's basically according to this Oxford comma format. This is basically the Oxford format of writing, within which this comma is placed before and then the sentence is considered complete and grammatically correct. And as it's following that format, it has been named as this serial or the Oxford comma. So generally within your writing, if you see it, consider it acceptable, and within your writing also try to add this comma as well. I will simply say add it, because that is going to make it grammatically correct, which is why I made it red. That is going to be grammatically acceptable and will be acknowledged and appreciated that you are following the format. You are placing that Oxford comma over here as well. That is the purpose of teaching you this comma as well. So I hope that you're going to remember whenever you see this comma placed before and, you can know and you can tell by looking at it that this is the Oxford comma being used over here. Semicolon. This is also another interesting punctuation mark, and it has also its variable uses, and I want you to follow it very carefully. Talking about first point, it is used to separate equal parts of a sentence. This is something which lies in the middle way, of course, between this full stop and a comma. Comma simply places like a temporary stop. This one is basically a stop which is longer and which is a bit more permanent compared to the one that you place by a comma. So this is more permanent, and if we talk about an absolute complete stop, that is basically the full stop. So this is the basic difference, which is why even if you look at it, this has the power of both the full stop and a comma, which is why it shows a semi-pause or a semi-stop. So you simply pause for a while and then you move ahead. This is one meaning that is provided when it comes to the application of a semicolon. But moving ahead, there are of course multiple uses, so I want you to go through each and every one of them. Let's have a look. Used to separate, of course, equal parts of a sentence. For example, Hassan is at office, Hasnan is at home. So one way or another, there is a situation, you can simply relate these two together, that they are linked, and there seems to be a minor pause between the two, but overall they are moving ahead and showing that there is a link, which is why semicolon has been placed. One thing. Secondly, of course, both are complete in themselves. That is why these are considered to be equal parts of a sentence, and that's why it has been used to separate them into two equal parts. That's why this is one, and over here there is one sentence, and over here this is another sentence, and together they form a sentence as well, which is why there is a colon. Now moving ahead, this semicolon is also used to join two complete and closely related sentences without any connecting words such as and but. So you're going to see another concept which is coming ahead, but this is also something to understand, that whenever there is no connecting, you can call it as a conjunction, but when there is no connecting word such as this one or this one, then you basically place a semicolon to connect these two sentences, or to simply connect closely related sentences when you want to join them. For example, it is a far better thing that I do, that I have ever done, and then you have a semicolon. It is a far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. In itself, it's an interesting expression. Look into it, but basically these are related, and to connect these two related sentences, you have basically placed a semicolon in between. So this is also another purpose which is fulfilled with the application of a semicolon. You move ahead. So basically it is also used to join two complete sentences where the second sentence begins with a conjunctive adverb. For example, however, nevertheless, accordingly, consequently, and instead. So you can see it from the example as well, that I wanted to make my speech short. However, there was so much to cover. So this is basically the point, that whenever you have two complete sentences where the second sentence, this one, has this conjunctive adverb from these ones, of course you can see, so then of course you're going to place this semicolon before it. As coming ahead within the other concept that we are going to study, you will see how these punctuation marks can make a big difference, making the whole expression grammatically correct, legible, and acceptable. So this is also another use of a semicolon right after this conjunctive adverb between two complete sentences which can make sense on their own. Another way of using it is to separate items in a list when one or more items are with a comma. So in journal, of course, for separating things, for putting a minor gap, of course you have a comma. But whenever there is a list in which the comma is already being used and then you want to separate items in a list which already has a comma, then how to separate? Because comma, comma, and again commas are coming, of course this is going to create a lot of confusion for your reader. So how to keep it in an appropriate format? Then comes the usage of a semicolon. As you can see, the speakers of some session included Tony Blair, you have a comma, the Prime Minister, now a semicolon. Gordon Brown, the Chancellor. Ruth Kelly, Secretary of State. So over here, between the names and alongside their designation, you can see between name and designation, you are using a comma over here and over here. But between these names, you have this semicolon as coming over here and here. So this is basically the way of using the semicolon for, of course, separating the list of items within any expression, as you can see over here. So this is also another usage, multiple uses, not just one, which is why you need to be sure in what way that punctuation mark is being used or whether used correctly or not. Colon. Now this one becomes even more interesting because you can just simply consider it to be an extension of a semicolon. Semicolon will take you towards the next detail. It simply provides you with some detail, with some connection, but colon takes you towards an extension of something. It provides you an explanation basically of what has just passed out or what has just preceded. So it is going to be an information which is following this colon. If you look at the point itself, this colon is basically used to indicate that what follows is an explanation of what precedes. What was behind, the explanation is basically coming right after this colon, because colon indicates that it refers to the upcoming explanation. So moving ahead, in case of the whatsoever is coming ahead, so this explanation will be specific, and what was preceding is something general. So this is the pattern, general information to specific information. I can call it deductive as well, because you know that deductive mode of writing and the inductive mode of writing, so I will call it as a deductive approach. In case of using a colon, make sure that the information which is preceding is general and the information which is following is specific, the deductive way. For example, there is one challenge above all others, and that is the alleviation of poverty. So this is specific and this is general. So this is the point which has to be remembered here. That is how you basically use a colon. Moving ahead, of course, referring to a list. That one was to separate items within a list, semicolon. Now look at this one. Whenever you have to introduce a list, then you use a colon. Like, there are 4 nations in the United Kingdom: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So over here, this is the way you basically apply or use a colon. Coming before a list, for the introduction of a list, you first place a colon, and that's how it can be used. You move ahead. A colon is never followed by a hyphen. This point is important because even back in my own time, I would say childhood, the way we were schooled, I don't know what did I see or what from where I learned it, but this was a common error even I used to make. Making these 2 dots of a colon and then placing this line. Let me try it again, this way. So this is basically a hyphen, a mark which is coming ahead, but this is not the way to use it. Rather, these 2 dots would come on their own, and that will suffice. You have to avoid using hyphen right after this colon. How to use this colon? Basically, A colon is never preceded by a white space, as you can see over here within this example of United Kingdom. Right after you have ended writing or typing the letter M of the United Kingdom, it's directly followed by a colon. There is no space. However, between this colon and the E of England, there is a space, which means it is always followed by a white space, and that is something to be kept in mind as well while using or while applying this colon. So this is one important point which should be there within your mind as well. Time to move ahead with our next punctuation mark, and this one is the hyphen that I just referred to back in our previous punctuation mark of colon. Now this mark shouldn't be used with a colon because it has its own purpose. What's that purpose? To separate syllables to make a word easier to read. This is one basic function which is performed when it comes to the application of a hyphen, that you place that dash. As you can see, coordinate, re-elect. This is the way, a simpler way of using this hyphen. And you always have these syllables within a word. Coordination. So coordination. These patterns, these gaps, these patterns that you can see rise and fall within my tone are basically these known as syllables, if you talk about it linguistically. So to separate syllables, to make it easier to read and to understand what basically you are being referring to, you basically use these hyphens. Coordinate, re-elect. Used in writing compound words which are hard to read and excessively wrong. For example, no smoking sign, black cab driver. So this is also another way of using this hyphen. Another one is to join words or parts of words. For example, you can see this one quite a lot. You see it up to date. These dashes which are there basically are known as hyphens. Sometimes to change the meaning as well. This is one important function. Look at these two words, recover and recover. They look quite similar, but there is a difference, as indicated that this hyphen has changed the meaning of these two expressions. If I talk about the first one, and if I just give you the example in the form of a sentence, you want to recover your sofa as the previous cover is getting old and losing its charm, beauty and color. So you recover your sofa by basically you are referring to this first recovering, covering it again. But when you say I want to recover my sofa which got stolen last week, so you are basically using another recovering, which means that you lost something and you want to get it back. So this application of this hyphen has changed the whole meaning of what it refers to when there is a hyphen and what it refers to when there is no hyphen. So recovering a sofa is something different from recovering a sofa. So one example, but I believe you are able to get it right. Moving ahead, used when a number forms part of an adjectival compound, as in this one. So over here, whenever you have to say 19th century novelist, 20th century writer, and so on, there are many examples which could be there. But the point here is once again that that's the way you basically use a hyphen. There is a hyphen that is placed when an adjectival compound has numbers. So number forms part of an adjectival compound. Now this is basically a dash, and you need not to mix it with the hyphen because hyphen has its own functions, as you have just seen it. This one basically has its own. For example, to indicate a break in thought, I'll have a hot dog with mustard, and then a break in thought. Let me take this over here. This is basically the symbol used. No, comma, make that ketchup. So comma indicating a minor break that I talked about. A little more would be a semicolon, and then a little more will be a full stop. So this is the way you can understand the basics of these minor changes or the minor functions which are being performed by these different punctuation marks. But coming back to the way a dash is used, this is the way a break in thought is being reflected over here, that the change in thought is there over here at this point. No, make that catch up. So if we move ahead, to separate a strong interruption from the rest of a sentence, the sentence itself will clarify it. All nations desire economic growth, and now some even achieve it, but it is easier said than done. So over here there is a statement, there is a complete sentence which is there, but then all of a sudden there has been an interruption, and a very strong interruption, as you can see in the middle. Once again it has that same structure, parenthetical style. Why am I calling it as a parenthetical style? Because parentheses or the brackets are never alone, they always come in pair. You see these parentheses, they are always there in pair, and they have this information inside them. So over here this dash is also being used for doing this strong interruption in a pair. That interruption is coming in between. So this example clarifies the idea. To add parenthetical statements, of course, in pair within the sentences, and a single dash when the statement comes either at the beginning or the end. So of course if it's coming in the middle, the rule of course would be that it should be covered from both sides. But if it's coming at the beginning or the end, so of course there will be a one dash. Dash is generally, this dash is considered less formal compared with brackets. So taking you back towards formal writing that you will be doing, of course this awareness is needed. So now you know how to use it, but remember the point that if you have to do it in formal writing, you have to avoid it, because brackets will do the job for you rather than these dashes. But of course for the informal communication, now you know how to use these dashes as well. To add emphasis or drama, of course this is also another purpose which is served in case of the application of a dash. He said that he would go, and he did. To indicate a range of numbers, as you can see, 900 to 1000, there is a range and you are basically placing a dash. To link two connected words, Sydney and Melbourne. There's one point that I would like to mention here. For discriminating or differentiating, even if you are like asked to differentiate, how you can differentiate or just tell whether there is a hyphen or a dash. The thing is that in case of this dash, as you can see over here, you're going to find a space at its left and at its right, meaning that from the rest of the sentence it is going to have single space from each side. Whereas in case of a hyphen, there is no dash. Basically it is once again playing the role of connecting things together, and basically, you know, we talked about it, that making it easier to read and understand all those syllables which are part of a single word. So it is basically trying to show you how many syllables are there and what are the important ones. So those syllables are being reflected, but basically the word is a single whole within which the syllables are there, and those syllables are being reflected by that hyphen. So you're not going to have any space between its usage or between its size. Rather, this one is going to be there separating two separate items, as over here, or including a new thought, which is why there will be a space at its each side. So this is another example. To link two connected words, these are the words being connected, but these are separate, so you have spaces. This is one word, this is the space, this is another word, and again there is a space and there is a space. So this is a drawing, but point here is you find the spaces which are there between words and the dash itself. Parenthesis, the one that we have been talking about, the one that we are referring to, that each and every punctuation mark, some of those that we have just discussed, are also performing a kind of similar function, but the formal way of course adding or containing extra information is the brackets, or known as the parentheses, which is why you see them within the APA format, of course, for citation. So this is the reason why these parentheses are used. So containing extra information for convenience, for understanding, considered more formal compared to the use of dash, as you have just seen within the previous slides. John, my brother, is coming to the party. Another function is to set off an interruption. So whenever you have to do any interruption, and if that interruption is relevant, so you basically do it in the form of brackets in formal way. I knew that he would come, and I was right, to join us in the evening. So a break, a sudden interruption is there, because if you remove it, once again the sentence will convey the whole meaning. And another formal, I believe, a formal way of using these parentheses is to enclose an acronym, and that you see in all the documents. Whenever once you have used a compound word, then you go for the acronym and you place parentheses, as EU for European Union. So this is also another usage when it comes to the parentheses. Quotation marks, speech marks, or the inverted commas is also another punctuation mark used quite a lot, used within writing, especially for quoting someone else's words. You have seen it when we talked about plagiarism, when we talked about citation. So how you basically cite, so you basically use this quotation marks, and right after you place parentheses within which the author's name, the year is there. So you see that corresponding application of parentheses and quotation marks. So how do you use them? To enclose the exact words of a person, as you have to say something, so you do it in this way. Whenever you have to talk about any words of some play, the way the person or the individual said it, of course you quote it in this way. In case of quotation marks within quotation, use single quotation marks within double quotation mark. I believe you got it right, as you can see it within the example as well, that within a statement, if there is another statement by another individual, the pointer is that if there is a statement within a statement, then how can you just simply quotation, double, then again double quotation, then closing this one, and then this one. This will create a lot of confusion, that whether the third quotation closing is for the first one or the second one. So to avoid that confusion, quotation within a quotation has single quotation marks, as you can see over here, and the outer quotation marks are double, basically, as this one and this one. Scare quotes are used to express irony and sarcasm, and those quotes are basically also using those single quotation marks, as over here. So Daniel was assured that he would be safe in the lion's den. So whenever you have to reflect irony or sarcasm, as the statement is conveying, then once again the inside would be the expression, which is basically that quote, or the expression reflecting irony, would be within single quotation mark. Used when one wants to talk about a word or phrase. So this is the expression about which the statement is basically about. One of my friends overuses the words actually. So once again, the whole statement talks about this expression and its overusage, actually. So you have placed it within double quotation marks, because the rest of the statement, of course, is once again coming within double quotation marks. If not the case, then you can place, of course, double quotation or about double quotation over that expression itself. Ellipses, also known as suspension marks, also known as omission marks. And with these names, you can clearly say that these are basically used to omit the information. For the omission of some speech or writing, you basically place these three dots as found over here, and these are going to show or reflect or portray that some information is basically missing. The omission of speech or writing, yes, this is the point and this is the example. To be or not to be, that is the question. Very famous line from Hamlet. But if you simply apply or use that omission marks, the ellipsis, that is how you basically do it, to be or not, and then these are the three dots, and these three dots are basically referring to this text in red color. So that is how you basically omit the information by these three dots. To show that some material has been omitted from our direct quotation. So even if you have to simply provide direct quotation, so that direct quotation, if it's long, it can be made short by using these three dots, as you can see over here. Most famous speech by Churchill, we shall fight them on the beaches. Then there are some other statements, we shall never surrender. So this is also another way of using these quotation ellipsis. Apologies. Apostrophe, used in writing and in a very good way and to a good extent. So what does it convey? What does it simply reflect? It's used to indicate a contraction formed by the omission of letters. These are the expressions where you can see this apostrophe is being used. Isn't is being made from is not, aren't is being made from are not, can't is being made from cannot. So this is basically the use of apostrophe. You are basically contracting the expression by the omission of some letters to indicate possession. So if you have to simply show that this is his, so with the name, of course, you simply use this apostrophe and then an S, as you can see, Delaware's room. So you're saying this room belongs to Delaware. You can say this is Delaware's room. To be avoided in formal writing. So in case of formal writing, this is the convention that now you know it, you can avoid and you should avoid it to a good extent within your formal writing. In case of plural, place the apostrophe at the end of a word. In case of your expression, as you can see, workers is a plural and you are talking about the rights of workers rather than a single worker. So workers' right means that this comma or apostrophe will come after this S rather than this one. This is for singular and this one is for plural. So this is the difference which should be there within your mind. Now we are going to talk about the run-on sentences. You are clear about the punctuation, and how to use it. You are well aware of it. Now its application, how you can apply it. There is one common problem which occurs basically within different forms of writing, and that is basically known as the run-on sentence. As you can see it from the figure as well, seems like Flash, a comic character, which is now being performed and played by different individuals as well on TV. But the point here is, this one is basically reflecting a sentence that keeps on running, and you are unable to find where to put an end to it. And how does it develop, or what's basically the concept behind it? When two independent clauses, which can convey their meaning because they of course have a subject and a predicate that talk about the subject, of course. So they have a subject and predicate, they have a complete structure, which is why they are being called as the independent clauses, which can exist independently. So you have them together, they are written adjacent to one another but are not connected properly. Of course, the punctuation is missing. For example, I love to play tennis. I would play one match every day if I had the time. So this area is creating the problem over here. You are unable to connect the two properly, which is why there is a confusion, and this keeps on running and running and running, which makes it a run-on sentence. One particular way is the comma splice. This is one particular category, how a run-on develops, in which a comma is used to join two independent clauses. For example, participants could leave their session at any time, and then a comma. They needed to indicate their preferences. So comma will not suffice here. It's creating the confusion, which is why once again this is becoming a run-on sentence and a special category known as the comma splice. Comma splice also involves the use of transitional expression along with the use of a comma. So that also remains another category, and this is basically making it a particular category of a run-on is this, and a comma splice is alongside the use of a comma there is a transitional expression, right? The findings of the analysis, just the way you will be doing the writing as well, findings of the analysis are incomplete, therefore further research is needed. So this is the transitional expression, and you have placed a comma, and right after it you have just completed the sentence thinking that the structure is grammatically correct, rather it is following within that category of a run-on sentence as well, which means there is an exercise which becomes important for the comprehension of avoiding a run-on. So how to correct run-on sentences? Well, there are ways. Most simple one is simply placing a full stop on a period. So if you do it, I love to play tennis, I would play one match every day if I had the time. You have placed it, thought is complete, moving ahead, there is another statement. Using a semicolon. And now you know why a semicolon is coming, because this one, of course, dividing a sentence into two equal parts also conveys this temporary break, which is of course longer than a comma but less long than a full stop. So which is why this semicolon is also coming over here. If you use it in this way, that is also correct and acceptable. If you move ahead, while using a comma will basically come or will need the help of something else, some other part of speech, and that is coordinating conjunction. So if you want to correct a run-on sentence from running out, so you basically have to use or you can use a comma, but that comma will come alongside a conjunction as this one. I love to play tennis, comma, and I would play one match every day if I had that time. So now this one becomes acceptable as well. Another way is using a subordinating conjunction, like because, due to, these are the subordinating conjunction because they make that sentence or that expression subordinate to the main one, which is basically now the independent clause. So earlier there are two independent clauses, as you can see over here. Now by placing this subordinating conjunction, you have made one independent into a dependent clause, and then the sentence once again becomes like an acceptable structure. For example, because I love to play tennis, I would play one match every day if I had the time. So this one again existing independently, but this because has simply made this one like a dependent clause by this subordinating conjunction. So this is the way in which you can basically use or correct a run-on sentence from becoming a run-on sentence, and that's the way you can write your writing correctly. Now some other examples. Now I want you to follow them carefully. Tyler delivers newspapers in the rain. He got very wet. A problem found over here, which is why it's a run-on. Correct it. Tyler delivered newspaper in the rain. He got very wet. You have a full stop and you have a capital. Again, Kevin and his dog went for a walk. It was a beautiful day. Problem. Correct it. Now you have simply applied a semicolon, and it has done the job for you as well. Moving ahead, by comma and a conjunction. On Monday we went outside for recess. It was fun. And it was fun, by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So that's the way these minor things are making such a big difference, and now you're able to realize it. This is the thing which needs to be learned with time. We make all these errors as well without realizing that these can have a big impact. So therefore I believe that now you're going to keep in mind what this concept of run-on is and how to correct it, how to avoid it. So with this we can move ahead to our next section, the last section of course, and the important one. Of course, seems like a very simple concept, but there are minor things which should be understood when it comes to the application of determiners. What's inside is something common, but itself the word seems like a bit confusing term, but it basically is referring to all the words which are placed in front of a noun to make it clear what the noun or the noun phrase is referring to. Word placed at the beginning of a noun phrase or a noun. Noun phrase basically develops when noun is accompanied with an article, and it can be an adjective like the dog, the black dog, or a dog, or it can be even a proper noun. Sometimes dogs are given named, so it can be an individual as well, by a proper noun or a name of an individual. So that will be considered as a noun phrase as well, because the name has two parts, first name, last name, so this one will be considered as a noun phrase as well. But in general, of course, if you are using a name, even a single name will be considered by convention as a noun phrase as well. So what is basically coming before it to refer to that noun phrase is basically a determiner, because it is determining the information whether it's generic, general, or specific. The examples will suffice. Basically, looking into their classification, they are classified as the definite article, the, or I will say the. So both of these pronunciations should be there within your mind. Back in my school ages, of course, I used to wonder why few of my fellows are saying the, while the others are saying the. Both used to say this is the correct way of pronouncing, and I was confused until the time I realized both of them are correct. Both of those categories of people who were pronouncing it the or the, they both are correct. It's just the usage which has to be understood with respect to its pronunciation and usage. Moving ahead, it's coming ahead. Indefinite article, and demonstrative, this, that, these, and those. You can clearly see in case of your definite and demonstrative, they are specifying that noun phrase to which they are referring to. Possessive pronouns to show possession. My, your, his, her, it's our, it's our car, it's your book, it's his pen, it's his room. Quantifier reflecting this element of quantity. A few, a little, much, many, a lot of. These are also some of the expressions which are quite common. In case of numbers or numerals, 1, 10, 30, these are also very much used, like 10 rupee or 30 books or 1 table. So basically, once again, determining that noun phrase by quantity, by number. And talking about distributives, all, both. Half of my friends are just waiting for me, they're all outside, all of them are gone. So this is the way these are helping you out to determine that noun phrase. Your friends, 3 of your friends, each and every one of them, neither of them is coming. So this is the way you learn the usage, and these are basically the words which are used to determine that noun phrase. So their purpose is basically to determine that noun phrase, what basically it is it something general or is it something specific. But the most common among these are basically the errors which are happening in case of the usage of definite and the indefinite article, which is why these will be focused more in our last slides. So talking about the indefinite article, from which I am referring to a and an. So these are basically to generalize the noun phrase. When the noun phrase has to be generalized, your listener or your reader realizes that you're talking about someone in general, not specifying that this is the person or this is the thing that I'm referring to. Then of course you go for the indefinite article, a and an. So to talk about persons and things in general, one minor difference to know when to use a and when to use an. A is basically used in case of consonant in the following word. For example, you have a word which is starting with a consonant, every letter other than A, E, I, O, U. For example, report is the word starting with an R, so you're going to place A before this report. A report, a letter. Whereas if there is any word which is starting with the letter A, E, I, O, U, which are basically known as the vowels, so then you're going to use an. As you can see over here, an email or an application. So this is basic difference which should be there within your mind. In addition to this basic difference, both are used before phrases of time and measurements. As you can see, 4 times a week, 100 kilometers an hour, rupees 40 a kilo. Before phrases of jobs, it's also used, like he's a doctor, he's an engineer, he's a car mechanic. So this is also another way of using these expressions. Moving ahead with a noun complement, as you can say, a good boy or a smart girl. Once again, their usage is pretty much common. Before phrases of nationality, she's an American, she's Canadian. That's the way, once again, you can use these expressions of indefinite article. With words such as half and quite, once again, you're going to use the indefinite article. Half a pound of sugar, quite an interesting story. So that's the way. This an is coming because of this vowel, and a is coming because of this p. So this has to be kept in mind as well. Now we have moved towards the last section, last section of our lecture, in which we will understand to conclude the whole discussion, and that is the usage of the definite article. Definite meaning specifying. So it is used to specify the noun phrase, and when we believe the listeners and the readers know what we are referring to. So when we know that they are sure of it, and if we are referring to that someone or something, they realize it, then you use this definite article, which is the. The is basically pronounced differently based on the following vowel and consonant. As you have just seen, and you can consider this an as an extension of this single a, which has basically developed for, differentiating whether the following word has this letter which is either a vowel or a consonant. So if it's a vowel, then you will simply pronounce this a as an. But to make it easier for everyone or every reader to pronounce it the same way, you have placed this n as well along with a to make it an. But in case of the is simply written the same way, spelled at the same way, but the pronunciation is different. In case of the word such as beginning, there is a b within this beginning, which means it's not a vowel. Therefore, you're going to simply say this the is the, yani the beginning. Whereas in case of your word which is starting with a letter that is a vowel, in case of an ending, I have said it an ending once again because the fact that it's a vowel. So ending has e, which is the vowel, which means the will no longer remain a the, rather you will pronounce it as the. The ending, the end, and the elephant, the cat, the dog, the horse. So this is basically the difference which has to be there. So this thing has no beginning, and there was the beginning and the ending, the beginning and the ending. So this is the way you can practice it to make yourself get used to it with the, instead of mixing it up. But this is the thing that I wanted to convey, and I believe I was able to do it right. So sometimes errors are okay, but it's always good to practice it. Now, how to use it? As I told you, in case of specifying something, of course you're going to place this the. So this is basically the life of Bill Clinton, which is why there is a the. And over here, life is too short. You're talking about life in journal, there is no the. When talking about a whole family in journal, again you're going to place this the. The Smiths live in Chicago, whereas you're talking about a single person, Mr. Smith lives in Chicago. So the Smiths versus Smith or Mr. Smith. Names of the countries which are in plural: mountain ranges and regions. United States of America, the Netherlands, the Highlands, the Rocky Mountains, the Middle East, Everything is covered and with a definite article. Groups of islands, the Bahamas, the British Isles, the Canaries. Once again, you find the use of definite article. Names with off phrase. Off phrase, anything or any phrase which has the use of the word off, as the Statue of Liberty, the Tower of London, off and off. So wherever there is an off, again there will be a the. Names of river, seas and ocean. The Nile, the Arabian, the Atlantic. So you find this difference in the pronunciation, the way I've just transformed the pronunciation of the to the, all of a sudden when the Nile, the Arabian, the Nile, the Arabian. This is the way you need to do a bit practice, and you'll become a master of it by just knowing it within the mind and then trying to apply it. Can be used with the name of 4 seasons: winter, summer, autumn, spring. So you can say, of course, the winter, the summer, the autumn and the spring. It happened spontaneously, but I did it right, thank goodness. Must be used with the American alternative for autumn, which is of course fall, as the admissions are open in fall. So in that case, it's a must by convention to use the definite article with fall. Now, where are the places where definite articles shouldn't be used? With a country name, if it's singular, as Germany, France, Italy, no the. With names of languages such as English, uses many words of Latin origin. With titles and names, when titles are accompanied with names, again no the, as President Hussein, Prince Charles, Queen Elizabeth. But why I've made it in bracket? Because now there is no name with it. So the Queen of England, the President of Pakistan, the Prince of England. So this is the way you have to keep and remember the difference, when to use the and where to avoid it. With years, like 1990 is a special year for my family. So with years, no use. Do you remember 2000 rather than the 2000? That won't be right. This one is okay. With the names of individual mountains, lakes and islands, like Mount McKinley is the highest mountain. She lives near lake. And have you visited Long Island? So these are basically the typical names of these mountains, lakes and islands. And alongside these, I don't find any the, and there shouldn't be any the, which is the purpose. That's why I made it right. Cross. This is not allowed with all the last few slides which I have just shown it to you.
In this lecture, we've covered the basics of punctuations. And now let's go over what we've learned. If you're someone like me who needs a constant reminder of where to put a comma and where to put a full stop, and not to make your teacher frown, this summary is for you. We hope that you find this summary useful, as it is full of examples. We'll start with the period, or as commonly known, the full stop. You need full stops to end sentences, which is pretty clear. A full stop basically tells the reader that a sentence or an idea has been completed. The example you're seeing here is a little meta, but it sounds cool anyway. Another reason to use the full stop is to indicate abbreviations. So when you say KPK for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we don't end up saying Kapak. This practice, however, is being phased out. The abbreviation are now usually indicated by capitalizations. The question mark is obviously used to indicate a question. So the statement, "Where do you live?" is asking where that person resides, instead of remarking on one's living standards. The space between the question mark and the word live is only to make the animation clearer. Don't ever add a space before any punctuation. An exclamation mark is used to indicate a command, a shout, or excitement. Imagine saying, "Do not call this number again," without an exclamation. Doesn't sound very compelling. Again, the spaces before and after the exclamation mark are only for emphasis. Note that it is in your best interest to avoid exclamation marks in formal writing, as it doesn't sound very polite nor mature. A comma is usually used to separate a list. In this example, red and yellow follow this use of the comma. In the second example, a comma is used to join two sentences. You'll learn more about this when you get to run-on sentences. For now, consider the example. I can tell you the reason, but I will not. The comma over here indicates a pause. Saying this without a pause, as in I can tell you the reason, but I won't, sounds a little strange, doesn't it? Another use of the comma, as in the example, Sir Muzammil, lecturer in CS department, is preparing slides, is used to indicate additional information. You can read the sentence without reading what's between the commas, and yet the sentence sounds complete. The semicolon is used to connect two related sentences. For example, saying, Ehsan is at office, separately, and then adding Hasnan is at home, sounds a little choppy. These two sentences complement each other and together convey useful information pertaining to a scenario frequently encountered in your class, perhaps. Similar comments apply to the next example, where two sentences are connected. This example highlights the difference between a comma and a semicolon, in that these two sentences are independent and grammatically correct on their own. Additionally, semicolons are used instead of commas if addition of commas becomes confusing. In this example, we have already used comma for additional information, so a semicolon is more appropriate. Had we used a comma instead, it would have given the impression that, say, Shahid Khaqan Abbasi and the Prime Minister are two different people. This example brings us to the next punctuation, the colon. As in the previous example, a colon is used to show that some information follows and is pointed to. This pointing is the crucial difference between a colon and a semicolon. A hyphen is used to connect a prefix and the word, like coordinate or re-elect. This practice is more prevalent in British English than in American English. However, both English styles agree to add the hyphen to adjectives like up-to-date. The hyphen is also added to form compound words like 19th century novelists. A dash is different from a hyphen in that it is longer. It is added between numbers to indicate an interval or even between places to indicate a route, as in the examples shown here. Parentheses or brackets play same roles as commas in that they convey extra information, and thus the phrase within the brackets may be omitted without loss of continuity. This usually isn't the case with commas. So the sentence, Asim is going to the party, in itself is complete, with the extra information my brother added. The second difference with commas and brackets is that commas are more formal than brackets. Same details apply for the next example. Another use of the brackets is to indicate an abbreviation and its corresponding meaning, like PK for Pakistan. Next on our list are the quotation marks. As it is usually the case, it is used to quote someone, as when quoting Hamlet, to be or not to be. On the other hand, if you already have quotation marks and would like to use quotation marks within the quote, you need to use single quotation marks. In this example, the word safe is sarcastic and would demand double quotes, but since this is already a quote, you need to place single quotes around it. Other than sarcasm, if you want to quote like the word actually within a quote, you should again use single quotation marks. Within quotes, people usually use what are called ellipses, written as 3 full stops together without spaces. This is used to indicate suppression of information for one reason or another. So the example, to be or not to be, that is the question, may be converted as follows, with the omission indicated by ellipses. The apostrophe is much like a single quote, only that it doesn't come in pairs, but is written as standalone. It is used to shorten words. So, for example, isn't would become is not. Another use of the apostrophe is to indicate possession, as in Ayman's room or workers' rights. Notice that in the second example, the apostrophe is added after the word. This is because whenever you have a word ending with an S, like a plural or maybe a name, this should be followed. Do not shorten your words using the apostrophe in formal writing. A run-on sentence is a sentence with two sentences spliced up. An example is, I love to play tennis. I would play one match every day if I had the time. This is grammatically incorrect. This may be corrected in various ways. 1. We can add a full stop between I love to play tennis and I would play one match every day if I had the time. 2. We can also add a semicolon between I love to play tennis and I would play one match every day if I had the time. If you don't remember the rules for semicolons, you can always rewind this video. Alternatively, we can also add a comma that would be grammatically correct as well. Both, however, have a slightly different meaning. A semicolon is used to give complementary information, whereas a comma is used to indicate a pause in a complete sentence. Next on our list is determiners, which are words like the, and, this, or even whose. There are two types of determiners. The first type is the indefinite article, which is used to refer to a general word like a report or a letter. The indefinite article a is not used carelessly. Instead, the indefinite article an is used whenever there is a vowel in the beginning, like an engineer or an American. The second type of determiner is the definite article the. It is used to indicate a singular word, as in the beginning. However, it is wiser to capitalize the first letter of the word, like the beginning or the ending, if you are referring to a singular event, like Roze-e-Azal and the Akhira. Similarly, if you are referring to the general life of Shah Rukh Khan, you wouldn't add the word the, but you would if you have some specific aspect of his life in mind. Also, if you're referring to someone's family, like a Khan family, you'd add the before the sentence, but you wouldn't if you were referring to a single person. This is because you can't add the before a proper noun, but there's an exception. You can add the definite article to proper nouns which refer to places, like the Margala Hills, or even a group of islands, say the Bahamas. Though, you shouldn't use this with every place. You can't add the before the name of a country, like Pakistan, or a language, say English, unless you're saying the English language. The isn't added before titles compounded with names, like Prince Charles, or years, or mountains, or places with a proper name. That's all on punctuations. At least now you have this video to turn to revise when to use double quotation marks, a question mark, a semicolon, an exclamation mark, and others. Thank you for watching.
And with this, one last one, I thought that it's the end, but mostly with the names of towns, streets, stations, and airports as Victoria Station, Bond Street, Florence, and Heathrow Airport. So with that also, there won't be any definite article. And with this, I come to the end of our today's talk. I believe it seemed a bit tricky with all the minor differences which are there within the use of these punctuation marks, run-on sentences, and determiners. But I believe even if you look at this last two figures that I have here in front of you, you can see the uses, you know the purposes now which they all are serving. They are happy that now you know them. So make them proud by their appropriate use, and the determiners will be looking at you as well in a similar way as these are. So with this, we come to the end of our today's lecture. The upcoming will also be covering some other aspects of grammar. I hope you'll be excited about it, because I certainly am, and working on it. So I'll bring all the details which are sufficient enough for you to make you a good writer in future. So till that time, take good care of yourself. I'll see you in the next lecture. Assalamu alaikum and Khud Hafiz.